Good morning. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. We are coming to you today from Goat Rodeo Podcast Studio in Washington, D.C. at 1501 M Street. Special thanks to the team at Goat Rodeo and MRP Realty for hosting us today. Our conversation today is global consumption of energy. And we have an expert in-house today, Charif Souki, the executive chairman of Tellurian, here with us to talk about advancements in energy, consumption, and everything that's happening around the world. So, live time, COP is happening. What is everyone talking about over there?
I think for the first time we have a catchphrase that actually has a meaning, and people have now pivoted to talk about the energy trilemma. Cute.
Energy trilemma, okay.
It actually means something. So basically, most consumers of energy around the world now are confronted with three issues. First, security of supply. Can I get my energy supply reliably on a long-term basis from somebody who is going to be there for me? Mm-hmm. The second thing, is it going to be affordable so that I can actually build my economy, my country around the energy that I can afford? And third, is it environmentally sustainable so that we deal with the climate crisis that is coming at some point in the future? Some people would argue that's already started, but the crux is going to be in 25, 30 years if we continue on the pace that we're going today. So this is not something that is very that is very easy to manage around the world. So you have 7 billion people around the world that are aspiring to be like the 1 billion people that live in OECD countries. Mm-hmm. They consume on a per capita basis 20% of the energies that we do. They all aspire to get at least to 50% as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be told it's going to take them 50 years to get to half the way, to half the level that we live today. Yeah. So this is the things that they're looking at, and this is going to be front and center in Dubai, where they're going to be talking about, we want to continue our growth. Mm. We have things that the West takes for granted that we don't get. And we won't like to get them. So in India and China, with 40% of the world's population, we're looking at what does it take to continue to sustain our growth so that we continue to catch up with OECD countries. In Bangladesh and in Pakistan, it's more critical than this, because without fertilizers, we don't have enough food for our people. So if we don't acquire this energy, we don't feed our people, and that is not a very comfortable position to be in. In Africa, we don't have electricity. So we need to give electricity to our people. And in Europe, we're losing our industrial base. So we need to wake up and see what we can do about losing all the car manufacturing and all the fertilizer companies that we need in order to continue to sustain ourselves. So the way you solve this trilemma is different depending where you are.
Interesting. So how has that changed in the United States? So when you started your career, we were really, as a country, an energy importer, correct? How has that evolved since you started?
Well, this is what has changed the world. Is one of the major importer of energy in the world has become one of the principal exporter of energy in the world in a very short period of time. A little bit over 10 years, less than 15 years. That happened so quickly that we're still grappling with what the consequences are. Our energy strategy in this country, our energy policy in this country used to be to become energy independent, and that was the case since the 70s. Yeah. And then all of a sudden we are energy independent, and the rest of the world is relying on us. We have not made the adjustment to think of ourselves as critical to the rest of the world.
Interesting.
So we don't have a trilemma.
Yeah.
We have a blessing of opportunities. We're rich in everything. We have enormous coal, we have enormous oil, we have enormous gas, we have sun, we have wind, and we have to make choices.
So if you were advising the president and you're going to COP and thinking about these conversations, how would you shift the narrative of how we should be thinking about our role, right? I think most folks think about the United States as being a leader on climate change and these issues, but this is really about energy, right? Like a lot of the climate issues are tied to energy consumption and production and so on. Should we be thinking differently about how we're producing and exporting?
I think the first thing is energy is fundamental to the economy of a given country. So making the assumption that we're going to be able to shift very quickly from one source to the other is a non-starter. Because it has an impact on people's lives. So where we are today is our energy is significantly cheaper than anywhere else in the world. So you look today at natural gas prices in the United States hovering around $3 an MMBTU. In Europe, they're between $12 and $14 an MMBTU. So we get everything related to natural gas at maybe 30% of the cost that the Europeans do. Probably the same percentage for Asian countries. So it gives us an enormous advantage in terms of re-attracting the industrial base that we lost up until about a decade ago.
Sure.
And this creeped up on us without us paying attention, because it happened and nobody was really looking.
So when you think about Europe today, last year they benefited from a warmer summer, but some of the supply from Russia has obviously disappeared. How should Europe be thinking about this winter and their own future in terms of access to natural gas and just energy consumption?
Okay, so I go back to what I just said. I mean, the $3 in the United States, $14 in Europe.
Yeah.
Okay, this is not a comfortable feeling for Europeans.
Sure.
And yet they're feeling good about it.
I mean, because it seems to me like it's only going to go up, right?
Because compared to $30 that was 2 years ago when it was cold, and the first time that the shock hit them, it was a real shock. So European countries had to subsidize their consumers to the tune of $600 to $800 billion that year. That's not sustainable on a long-term basis. So now we've come back from $25, $30 in MMBTU to 12, 14.
Yeah. So everybody gets
so and all of a sudden we're feeling good about it. It's like the frog that was in warm water and it became boiling and the frog didn't notice. So the Europeans are not sitting in a comfortable position. They're paying very, very high prices for their energy, and it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
So talk a little bit more about that, right? We have the situation in Russia, we have a situation in Israel, we have competition with China, the trilemma, as you explained, right, about security, certainty, price. That all seems upside down when you think about Europe and other markets, right?
Yeah, I think the markets that are suffering the most at the moment are Europe first and China second. Yeah. India is actually doing extremely well because they're getting cheap Russian oil. Okay, but if you look at the latest announcement from India, they are doubling up on their coal production because it is domestics. They don't have to rely on anybody. It is affordable. The coal is the only energy source where you can double the production without affecting the price, because the reserve to production ratio is 150 to 1. So the coal has a lot of room. You find coal reserves in India, China, Indonesia, Russia, Australia, and America. The only two that are indicating a serious concern with trying to phase coal out are Australia and America. The others are saying we have a number of bad choices in front of us. If you remember 2 years ago, New Delhi and Beijing were suffering from pollution. This is not something that happens 30 or 40 years down the road.
No.
This is something that's happening now. And they were trying to make a concerted effort to get away from coal for power generation and focus on natural gas to have a cleaner air in their major cities. And New Delhi and Beijing were kind of the symbols of what they were trying to do. Well, if you see what has happened in China and India, they both doubled up on coal production. They made their choice. So when they look at their trilemma, they say, okay, it's domestic, so I don't have to rely on anybody. It's affordable, so I can afford it. And it's going to have consequences, which is I'm going to increase pollution. I'm going to have to deal with that. But I've made my choices. I've started with security, I've gone to affordability, and I understand that there's some holdbacks on this and some disadvantages to doing this, which is going to be in the short term pollution and the long term climate impact. But I will have to live with that. And that's the trilemma.
So one of the reasons I was so excited to have you today is not only are you a very active thought leader on these topics, but you're physically doing this, right? Like you are one of the pioneers of LNG and so on. So talk a little bit about your career in pivoting into natural gas, how quickly you were able to kind of carve out a market, and what you and your team at Tellurian are doing today. Because you're a roll up your sleeves, you kind of pioneered the kind of advancements in this sector.
Well, okay, it's a long progress. So I decided in the mid-90s that I wanted to start focusing on one industry as opposed to being an investment banker for a multiplicity of industries. And when I did this, I wanted an industry that needed capital because that's the skill that I have. Sure. I know how to raise money. That where technology was going to make a difference. And that had been probably starved for capital for a while, and therefore would require some new ways of thinking about things. And I looked at different industries and boiled it down to energy finally, because it had all the characteristics. You could do things with a desktop that you would have 10 years before you would have needed a great computer. So it was becoming affordable. The company had been starved for the industry had been starved for capital for a while in the mid-90s. Sure. So it was going to start requiring capital again, and there was new ways of doing things. And then for the next 10 years, I got everything wrong. So first I thought we were going to do exploration in the United States, and it turned out that it was technically very successful, commercially a disaster.
Amazing.
And then when I got to that point, I said, okay, so maybe I'm not finding natural gas with the new technology. Technology is great,
sure,
but it's working where you're finding smaller and smaller reserves. Therefore, commercially, it doesn't work. It's wonderful
the tech
science.
Was good, but
it's a wonderful science project, but I can't make money at it. So then I went and said, okay, then if that's the case, we're going to need to import natural gas. And I made a big effort with this, and I spent sort of 4 years in the desert until Alan Greenspan decided that it was a good idea. And he advertised that it was a good idea. And when he said that, all of a sudden, everybody paid attention to what I was trying to do. And for 3 or 4 years, it looked like we were onto something. We're going to import natural gas from the rest of the world. And then the shale revolution happened, and the genius became an idiot. I'll never forget the day that we were inaugurating our import facility in Louisiana with the Secretary of Energy, with both senators from Louisiana, with a whole delegation of politicians and bureaucrats.
Investors.
And the stock of our company at the time, Cheniere Energy, crashed that day by like 60%, because people have finally figured out that we had found a ton of gas. Or we actually had found a way to produce the ton of gas we always knew we had, but we figured out how to do it. And it was it was in 2008, it was the beginning of a very painful 2 years where we looked at things and said, okay, we made a $2 billion investment in a plant that seems that has nowhere to go. And then from there, one day, Aubrey McClendon from Chesapeake called me and said, Charif, can you go in the other direction? And Aubrey was a good friend, so he said, Aubrey, why? It took some time to understand what the motivation was, but he was starting to realize that we had plenty of natural gas in this country. And he was the first one to sort of clue me into that maybe we can go in the other direction.
Fascinating. Which was unheard of at the time, right?
Well,
or not expected.
No, I was sitting despondent in my office thinking, what am I going to do with this white elephant I have? and when Aubrey called me, I started scratching my head and said, okay, Would it work if we tried to go? But now, a liquefaction facility costs 10 times what a regas facility costs. So the order of magnitude, we had invested $2 billion. We needed to contemplate investing $20 billion.
Wow.
And it took me maybe a year to first convince myself and then convince my board.
Wow.
But then it worked. So we sort of solidified the position of the United States as a major producer of natural gas. We figured out over 2 to 3 years how deep the resource base is in the United States. So we became comfortable that actually it works. We understood what it was going to take with the technology we had at the time in 2010 to produce all this gas, and we figured out that actually it's pretty cheap, pretty affordable. And the infrastructure that needs to be built to export is not cheap or affordable.
Sure.
It's expensive, but given the delta that I was talking about before, if you produce gas in America at $3, and even if it over time goes up to $4, and in Europe they're paying $14 on average, there's a very, very substantial profit to be made.
And when did you start to realize that export model and the delta was going to be so dramatic?
So that dramatic, probably 5 or 6 years into the process, because initially we didn't know how deep the resource base was going to be in the United States. Sure. So how long can you continue to produce gas at a reasonable price? And the second thing that we had to do is to sort of get a good grip on how much it was going to cost. We got very lucky with the first phase because there was no inflation. Therefore, our cost stayed stable through the construction period. Interest rates stayed low, so our cost of financing did not increase. And the market continued to grow on a long-term basis. So you can have some nervous moments in the process. Nothing is smooth. But on a long-term basis, energy demand continues to grow at about 1.5% to 2% per year. It's done this for the last 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, 50 years. So it's not going to change because, as I said before, 7 billion people around the world want to live like the other 1 billion.
Sure.
And nothing is going to stop them unless it's money. If the prices go up too high, then it will slow them down. But outside of that, they will use whatever energy source can go. And natural gas is probably the easiest to grow at scale with minimal damage to the environment. And that was until now fairly affordable and fairly accessible. In the last 2 years, most of these assumptions are now changing very quickly.
So, Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act, Infrastructure Bill, a renewed kind of urgency in America for industrial growth, new companies building facilities and plants. Do you see energy consumption just in the United States growing at a faster clip than maybe folks realize? Because every time we go out on a site selection, the utilities are important, water is important, and natural gas capacity is always part of the conversation for new projects and new sites. So, two-part question. How do you think about demand for consumption of energy domestically? And then also any thoughts you have on these programs and the innovation and kind of reshoring and manufacturing?
So what the Inflation Reduction Act is doing is, in one way or the other, try to put a price on carbon emissions. Directly, indirectly, providing an incentive to certain industries or providing a impediment to certain other industry. But at the end of the day, the way you're going to change consumption behavior is by putting a cost on bad behavior. Okay, so if you really think that you want to reduce our energy use and encourage conservation, which is probably the low-hanging fruit in developed countries, and particularly in Europe and in the United States, then you have to put a price on carbon, directly or indirectly, and that's what the IRA does. Okay, so on that basis, it's providing motivation for people to do things differently, study technologies that are not yet developed but that could have an impact. And those are the things that industrialized countries can do. So you're going to find that you're going to have two type of incentives. The first one is from countries that need to grow for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And those are simply going to go to the cheapest source of energy possible. And today that's coal. And you're seeing it happening in China and in India, and I'm sure it's going to happen in other countries also. And then the countries that have a choice are going to make an effort to put a price on carbon to motivate a change of behavior from the consumers. That's very difficult. So you have to look here at, are we really willing to pay $5 a gallon at the pump? Are we willing to see our electricity prices go up? Are we willing to see our heating prices in winter in Chicago go up? And if the answer is yes, then we'll have an impact. If the answer is no, then we're not going to do anything, and we can continue to consume energy at a rate that is not defensible. I mean, we drive not the most efficient cars. We don't turn off the lights when we leave the office in the evening. We have consumer patterns that are not rational or environmentally sensitive. So the question for us in the United States is, are we willing to change our behavior? In Europe, the European Union is making an effort, but it's offset by the countries.
Sure.
So yes, there is a price on carbon in Europe, and then there's a subsidy at the level of each individual country that negates the benefits of having the price on carbon. So neither one of us in Europe or in the United States are doing what we need to do in order to change people's behaviors. So there's a lot of talk about it, but it's not followed by action.
And you've been, I think, for a while now, advocating a carbon tax and kind of been blunt about some of these.
I think it's going to be close to 15 years now, but I'm not making much progress.
Right?
But because I think if we're serious about all this, I think whatever you want to call it at the end of the day, I mean, I'll paraphrase Lee Raymond. He said, look, if you're going to force me to do something that I don't believe in, at least make it blunt and clear. Okay? Just put a carbon tax.
Just do it.
This is Lee Raymond. I think you can be more subtle than this. You can do it a little bit better, or you can do a cap and trade, or you can do whatever you want. But at the end of the day, if you don't put a price on carbon, directly or indirectly, you're not going to change people's behavior. And this is what we need to do. We, with 5% of the world's population, we consume 20% of the world's energy. So if we don't start, nobody's going to follow.
Tell us a little bit about your current project, Driftwood, Tellurian. What are you up to? What's your timing? What do you think the market's going to look like? It seems like there's plenty of room for increased supply and capacity.
Well, as I said, the arbitrage is enormous today. You produce American gas at $3 and you can sell it around the world at a net back to the Gulf Coast at $10, $11, $12, minus transportation.
Sure.
So if you produce it at 3 and you liquefy it for 2.5, you're on the water for 5.5 and you can sell it for 10 to 12. So the numbers are there.
Yeah.
The business model is not there. How you finance these projects. And we unfortunately have seen projects that have been unrealistic about the kind of cost for the service that they've offered to their customers, and therefore it's very difficult to finance. In one particular case, the plant has already produced 200 cargoes, but the customers have not seen an ounce of LNG. So you can think of whatever the reasons are for this, that is not supportive of a business model that can be duplicated. So if you have Shell or BP expecting to receive cargoes and they're not receiving cargoes, you can imagine they're not going to be very happy. They do share part of the blame because they did a deal that was too good to be true, therefore it was not true. So you have to look at these things. This is not, it's not a game. There's real industrial consequences. So if you don't pay enough for the service, you cut corners. If you cut corners, you put people at risk, and that's not a good idea. So those are very, very dangerous, difficult to manage, large industrial facilities that have to be run properly. You cannot do it on a shoestring. This is where we are today. So we, as you know, in my career at Cheniere, I built 2 plants, and I decided to do one more run. And so at Tellurian, I'm building another plant. We started construction a year and a half ago. We still don't have partners. So we're getting to the point where we've done everything we can do by ourselves.
And that's like clearing the site,
Clearing
getting
the
it
site,
ready.
but having piles. In Louisiana, you cannot build anything without having the foundation really solid. So we have driven 15,000 piles, and that basically de-risks the project. All LNG facilities above ground are the same. Underground is what dictates what the cost is going to be and what the risks are going to be. We've done that part, and now we're going to wait for our partners to come and join us. The good news is the economic opportunity is so large, and there is no other project in the United States that is in our state of readiness today.
Potentially to deliver by 2030, even sooner, right?
No, 28, I hope.
Amazing.
I mean, and unless we don't find the partners in the next year. But it's a project that is ready to go. The arbitrage is there. The need for the natural gas on a global basis is there. So it will happen very quickly now, I think, because I think the deals were too good to be true are finished. There's no other project that is in our state. Our 2 competitors are Rio Grande and Port Arthur. They both started construction. They're still a year behind us because we started construction a year and a half ago. But they have their financing. You can look at the commercial agreements and think they're good, better, and different. It doesn't really matter. Those 2 projects are going to get built. We're down to 1 construction company in the world that can do this kind of work. It's Bechtel. All the others have tried and failed. They're gone. I mean, McDermott has had miserable cost overruns. Fluor has had miserable cost overruns. Other companies don't want to touch it anymore because those are very large, very difficult, very expensive projects to build. Bechtel has the bandwidth, the experience, the discipline, and the balance sheet.
And you have the relationship, and
well, I did 45 million tons with them for 30 or 40 billion dollars. We know each other extremely well. We've worked with I mean, I don't consider them a supplier of services. I consider them a partner. And we've had a fantastic relationship with them. It's been outstanding. They took a risk on me when I did my first regas facility. And Riley Bechtel was extremely gracious and told me, Charif, I believe in you. I think you're going to do it. And when I was a really, really small company, so he took a bet on me. And we've had a fantastic relationship ever since. That was 20 years ago, 23 years ago.
So when we look around the country with all these incentives and programs and new companies and innovation happening and IRA, DOE, LPO are all helping to fund, I feel like there's a lot of young Charifs out there, right? Is there any new technologies that you're seeing that you're getting excited about? Is there any advice you have for some of these new entrepreneurs? Because they're so focused on their own technology, but there's real life challenges around site selection, around construction partners. Like, you know this better than anybody, right? Like some of the things you kind of can get tripped up on could stall and delay your entire, delivery of a product.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
But look at my career. Yeah. I made 3 major mistakes. And so, the old saying, you don't...
Well, that's why I'm asking. You've learned. You've got the...
You don't teach an old dog new tricks. Okay, so I have become good at one thing, and I made my mistake. I paid my dues, and I'm going to stick with what I know. Right, so I'm absolutely sure that there are younger people that are going to see things that today I can't see. Yeah. I will not understand them, and I don't have the time to make the mistakes that I made in my career.
That's totally reasonable. As we kind of wind down, what do you think, where are we going to be in the next 10 years, you think, as you look at the kind of global energy markets, consumption, challenges?
So, first, energy is going to be more expensive.
More expensive.
Yes, because if you look at the growth rates of the 7 billion people that they're going to require to try to catch up as quickly as they can with the lucky billion. The growth rate is going to continue, and we're going to have to look at all the different energy sources. So it's going to require a higher price for all energy in order to be to supply the kind of demand that is going to be there. And it does not have to be dramatic. As I said, even 1.5% to 2% growth rate, it's going to require an increase of energy consumption of something like 15 to 20%. We just don't have it. So all of our energy resources are going to be strained. Unfortunately, you can start seeing a clear direction that coal consumption is going to continue to increase, regardless of what we do. So we're going to have a negative impact on the environment. The second thing is, I am absolutely certain that there will be new technologies that will come and that will be adaptable to things that can be done in OECD countries. I don't know what they are today, but they will come, but they will not be sufficient to make a significant difference. I think in 10 years we'll look and we'll say everything that we've done until now to improve the environment has not worked. But we can continue to do this, and we have to continue to find new technologies. And today the only thing that I see on a long-term basis that would work is nuclear. So it becomes how fast do we go to nuclear? But I think 10 years from today, nuclear will be a lot more acceptable than it is today. And you can already start to see the change with different countries saying, we're going to have to find a new generation of nuclear facilities and reduce the prices because it's still very expensive. So those are the things that I think will go in the next decade. Will we find other things to do in the meantime? I'm sure at the margin we can do a lot of things. Will carbon capture work? Yes, in some cases. Will hydrogen work? Yes, in some cases. It will not make a difference. Can we continue to develop wind and offshore wind in particular? Yes, but it's a lot more expensive than people think. Can we do solar? Absolutely, I believe in solar. I mean, my country of origin, for instance, is getting 70% of its electricity today from solar panels because we have 300 days of sunshine. And Lebanese people, in spite of the wars, in spite of the trouble, and are rational people. They said, okay, so if I have to put a diesel generator, and I don't know where am I going to get where I'm going to get my diesel, and I cannot rely on my electricity company, how can I be independent? I'm going to go get a solar panel and put it on my roof. So people live with necessity and with choices, and at the end of the day, they do what is rational. And it's nice to have strong beliefs in terms of doing the right thing, but you're first going to take care of yourself, okay? And then you're going to try to do the right thing at the same time. Now, the one thing that I will say that is going to make a huge difference is the United States has to understand our role in improving the rest of the world. And we have to shift from this mentality of we're looking at energy independence is something that is critical, and understand the role that we're going to play on a global basis and our ability to affect people around the world. And if we do that, our geopolitical reach will be completely different. So this is where we're heading now. We're starting to realize that they need our gas, they need our oil, they need our technology for all the different renewables that can make a difference in people's lives. And without us, people can actually have famines in Southeast Asia, or not have electricity in Africa, or our European friends can lose their industrial base. So what we do as a global actor in the energy systems that are going to be developed is critical.
You've talked, I think, a little bit about nature-based solutions, and you've talked about this expansion. As you think about this, and we'll kind of close on this, how do we use this as we think about China and kind of strategic competitors, right? Like if we have all this extra capacity, should we be doing more for some of these countries? Like how's this geopolitical kind of competition with, countries like China?
Well, I know people kind of are condescending to the simplest nature-based solution, which is plant trees. Okay, it actually works.
Yeah.
2 trees will remove 1 ton of carbon over the life of the tree. You have to do it right. You have to make sure that you do it in the right way. So we at Tellurian have already planted 3 million trees, and we're on our way over the next decade, hoping to plant 500 million trees. That's our contribution. You can't be everything to everybody. So we picked what we think works.
Correct.
And for the rest, if China wants to go with their own coal, they can.
Yeah.
They're going to have some holdback. And you can't use coal for everything. They need natural gas. They need us for natural gas.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's that simple. So you that is a tool in your toolbox if you want to have a global impact. If you don't want to use that tool, that's okay. But I'd rather use both hands than one hand.
Sure. Well, Charif, it was such a pleasure having you. We appreciate you coming in person to be here at Heyday 1501 Goat Rodeo for this conversation. Appreciate the frankness and the insights, and it's a pleasure spending some time with you this morning.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. It's coffeewithken.com. We're also on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. Wishing everybody a happy holiday season and looking forward to talking a lot more in the new year, especially about important issues around energy consumption and climate change. Thanks, everyone.